and Shout. I'm your host, Steve Hansen, actually here in Pattaya City, Thailand, eating my breakfast here on a Monday morning. But uh, but it is Sunday evening there back home, and so it's Family History Night. So Cheryl's online here with me, and we're going to talk about the memories of Grandma and Grandpa Hansen and Uncle Jim. And Cheryl, I'm going to go and let you start, and then I'll jump in with some inspiring thoughts and stories as we go along.
All right, sounds good. So, since it's Family History Night, Steve and I decided to talk about our earliest memories of the farm. So, we actually, Steve and I really kind of started to become aware when we lived in Texas. So, I was 6 and he was 4 when we moved. But before that, Grandma and Grandpa took care of Steve and I actually quite a bit when I think about it. Looking back, oh, you're having your unicity?
Yeah, I had my unicity before I ate my breakfast this morning. So
Good job.
yeah.
It was
So,
like 99.9%.
when I look back at family movies,
It was
there was a
so
time
good.
when Steve and I were little that Grandma and Grandpa
Like
watched
it was
us a
good.
lot,
It was
I
okay at the
think.
beginning. It just tasted like
There's
regular
someone else
cow. It's
talking.
like, well, what you buy into, you go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay. So, um, when Steve and I were little, our mother was in the hospital in Tiffin, Ohio. And so our dad rented a home around the corner from the farm. In fact, that home is still there. Every time I go by, I remember living there. But I was 3 and Steve was just a baby when we lived there. So there's family movies of that time at the farm with, me being an idiot, hopping in the playpen with Steve and jumping around. So we actually were there when we were quite tiny, but I don't really remember that time period. So the earliest memories of me at the farm were when I was 5 and Steve would have been 3. And our mom and dad went to Scotland. We've discussed this before. Scotland and Europe, they went over. Dad had some papers to deliver, and then dad wanted to show her around Scotland where he had been an exchange student. So they were over there for quite a long time. So grandma and grandpa took care of us and we lived at the farm and I started kindergarten at Thompson School, which is why my kindergarten picture of my schoolmates is from Thompson School, which actually kind of surprised me when I saw it the other day. But so we were there at Thompson School and my favorite thing to do was to get up in the morning at like 5 or 6 and go out into the barn with grandpa to milk the cows. So he would, if I don't think he really wanted me to come, honestly, but I asked him to wake me up so that I could go. But sometimes I would catch him going, like sneaking past the doorway where I was sleeping. And I would sit up and I was going, Grandpa, you weren't going to take me with you. So he would take me down to the kitchen, get me all dressed. I thought I was being helpful, of course. And we always had toast with peanut butter and honey on it. That was Grandpa's thing. And toast and I'm sure he had coffee. And I don't remember what he gave me, milk most likely. And so we sat at the kitchen table and had like a little mini breakfast before we went out to milk the cows. And so I would go out to the barn with grandpa, and I'm sure I had some boots on or something. I'm sure I looked kind of funny. And I would stand there as he milked the cows and I'd walk in with him to dump the milk into the cooler and then I'd walk back out. I mean, I was basically just his shadow. And we had a collie dog back then named Buddy who was actually like Lassie. And Buddy was such a good dog, and he took such good care of me. When I was in the barn with Grandpa, I would walk up and down the ridge of the middle of the barn, and if I got too close to the back side of the cows where they could kick me, Buddy would come around and push me back to the center of the walkway in the barn. I remember him doing that. He literally shepherded me. So that was really sweet. That's such a cool remembrance. In fact, I use that as whenever you have to do those little quizzes and they ask you 3 things for you to remember from your past and they're like, who's your first pet or whatever. And Buddy's always what I put. So um, he's definitely, part of my memories and I loved it. I love that dog. But so grandpa and I'd stand around watch him milk the cows, and then he would have to go over to the granary for feed. So he'd put me into the wheelbarrow and he'd bounce me all the way over to the granary, and then he would get the feed. And then he would put me on top of the feed and then bounce me all the way back into the barn where we were milking. And I always just thought that was great fun, of course. And I would giggle and carry on. And then at the end of milking, Grandpa would bring out a great big platter and pour a bunch of foamy milk in there, and cats from everywhere. You would never even know there were that many cats around. There must have been a dozen cats. They would come and run up and drink all the milk. And so I really looked forward to that time of the day. And then he would let me help him feed the calves. And one of my favorite smells on earth is that calf starter that he would put into the bottles and shake up. And then I got to try to hold it while the calves would eat. And they really try to jerk it out of your hands. So it's kind of fun. And the other thing I remember about being in the barn as a child was in the northeast corner of the barn, there was a pen with a bowl in it. And I don't remember that bowl's name, but I remember Grandpa would not let me anywhere near it. And he would get like upset with me, like maybe spanking upset if I got close to that bowl. So I always knew to be kind of afraid of that bowl and stay away from it. There was obviously reasons for that.
Yeah,
But
even
I
even Grandpa had a healthy respect for that bull. Like he would go in the pen with it to feed it. You could see Grandpa approach that bull a lot differently than he did the cows. And
yeah,
and the bulls seemed to have a healthy respect for Grandpa too. But they kind of had an understanding. But
right,
but he didn't just like walking there the way he would with the cows.
right. So that was some of the happiest times of my youth, was just doing that with Grandma and Grandpa, with Grandpa. Obviously, Grandma was in the house cooking and cleaning, as was her whole life. But so I just felt like I was one of Grandpa's helpers. And so sometimes he would actually get past the door out to milk, and he would come back in, and I would be coming down because I would have just woken up, and I would just let him have it for not waking me up. Grandpa, you didn't wake me up. What's wrong with you? So, and then he would drive me to school because I was going to kindergarten, but I didn't start till noon. So he would drive me to school, and he laughed and laughed because he said one time I told him, like, as he was flying over the hills, and I said, Grandpa, you're going too loud, because apparently it was one of those old farm vehicles that had probably the pipe on the back wasn't really on very well. So it's making all sorts of noise as Grandpa took me to school. But um, so I remember that. I remember Grandma. Now, Grandma Hanson, she was so fun. She would always have a beautiful breakfast on the table when we came back in from milking, which took a couple hours, so probably about 8 o'clock. And then I also remember Grandma, the tang that she made for us, which me and Aaron and Steve were discussing recently. It was like the most watered down tang. It barely tasted orange, but there was some nice cold water in there with maybe a teaspoon of tang. And it was just not the best tang, but Grandma had grown up in the children's home where I'm sure everything was
Split in
doled
half,
out
yeah.
sparingly.
Yeah.
So we had really, and then our chocolate milk was, you could barely tell it was chocolate. Maybe, a tablespoon of Hershey syrup in a great big glass of milk. So that's just how Grandma was. And then when we took baths, she would put in like 2 inches of water and then make us sit in there. And it was so flipping cold. I'd be like, Grandma, put some water in. I mean, when we took baths at our house, we had like a foot of water, but Grandma made me sit there and freezing cold with this like 2 inches of water in the tub. And maybe she didn't want me to drown, but I thought maybe it was left over from the children's home as I got older, and maybe they were sparing on water. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sure they had plenty of water at the children's home. So
So did she ever do the line on you about having the enough dirt on your knee to grow a potato?
no, for me it was that I wouldn't eat my peas, and she'd give me the line about the starving children in India or
Oh,
something. And so I
right.
ought to appreciate my peas because there's other places in the world that children are starving.
Children starving, yes.
And I would tell her, they can have my peas, Grandma. I'll mail them my peas
You can ship them
as
over.
long as I don't have to eat them. So I do remember when we were at the farm, of course, there was the picture of the cows on the walls. And then there was that great big clock in the corner with the big corn stalk coming up out of it. And I just remember there being a lot of pride about being a farm family. And that
Yeah.
just never left me and never has left me. So that was a really
Grandpa
a
loved
fun.
Grandpa loved his work. He really
Yeah.
did love being a farmer. So
Yeah. And then stories about Uncle Jimmy. Uncle Jimmy was our uncle. He was crippled and he sat in a chair. And Grandpa would bring him out from bed in the morning and set him in the chair. And Grandma would take care of him. A lot of times he was just in pajamas. They didn't really dress him. But, Grandma would take care of his toilet things right in front of us. And she would feed him. She would give him to drink out of one of those bent straws. And she always would put on these TV shows for Jimmy that were like very childlike, like Mr. Rogers and Captain Kangaroo and stuff. And as I got older, I started to think, I bet those bored the heck out of him. I think his brain still worked, even though his body was
Right.
crippled. So
Right.
she's sitting there making him watch Captain Kangaroo, But I mean, for us as little children, it was fine. But for Uncle Jim, he was probably like, put on a documentary or maybe a TV show with some sexy girls or something.
I think she wanted to make sure she avoided that kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
I'd never even thought about that, Cheryl. But even though he had problems with speech and whatever, I think his mind was fairly intact. So I think you're right. He probably was bored to tears.
Yeah, with Mr.
with all
Rogers.
that.
Yeah. So Jim was just like, I just learned to love him so early. He was just, you could really tell he had just such a righteous spirit. And he loved me. We just had a bond. When Grandma would put him in his wheelchair and wheel him around, I'd sit on his feet and just get a ride around wherever she was taking him. And so I think Uncle Jim just thought that was a hoot. And I was his entertainment. I was always just so stupid and just idiotically jumping. Whenever I see the home movies, I'm jumping. So, Uncle Jim, if he could have rolled his eyes, he probably would have rolled his eyes at me. But I think at least I was some amusement for him, where he just sat in the chair daily watching these dumb shows on TV. So at least this little girl bopping around was something different, anyway.
Different for sure.
And even as an adult, anytime I would maybe go 4 years and not see Uncle Jim, and I could look completely different. I put on a lot of weight as an adult, and I would come, and the first thing he spoke really, really slow, but he would be like, "Hi, Cheryl," and he knew who I was, and that always amazed me, even as an adult, that he recognized me. So one of my favorite things is to think about when I pass on and go to the other side, and Uncle Jim will be there, and I'll get to see him in his full stature and what he really looks like. And I think he's going to be incredibly handsome, because both of our dad and our Uncle Bill were both very handsome men. So it'll be really fun to see Uncle Jimmy on the other side. And my dad has written an entire booklet about his brother Jim, and we're going to get that from Susan and read part of that online soon, because um, in a lot of ways, my dad dealt with a lot of guilt, because he kind of thought that what happened to Jim was his fault. And I think that has colored his entire life, and maybe even some of ours. So that's a really interesting story that should be delved into. And needless to say, we love our Uncle Jim. So do you have any more to say on that topic, Steve?
Well, I will say this about Uncle Jim. I felt the same way about Uncle Jimmy. I think maybe you were a little closer to him than I was, but I still felt close to Uncle Jim. But the one thing that I didn't like about Uncle Jim is I would suck my thumb when I was young, and Grandma didn't want me sucking my thumb. And so when Grandma would leave the room, and I was watching Mr. Rogers or Captain Kangaroo or that with Uncle Jim, I would start sucking my thumb when she left the room. And then when she would come back in, she'd like, were you sucking your thumb? And of course I would say no. And then she would ask Uncle Jim, and he would always rat me out. He would always be like, yeah.
That's so, I didn't know any of that. That's so funny.
He would rat me out every time. So at those moments, I didn't like Uncle Jim as well.
Right.
But anyway, he would never protect me. He would never guard me from Grandma. So
Right.
then I would get in trouble for sucking my thumb. But
Well, see,
other
I
than
was a
that, Uncle
perfect
Jim was
child,
pretty
so
good,
me
but
and Uncle Jim were always good.
he wasn't sticking up for me there. And I can
Right.
still remember that. Yeah.
You did that really well. That actually looked a lot like him.
Oh, that's very ingrained in my head.
Yep.
Was he sucking his thumb? Yeah.
That is awesome. That
Oh.
makes me love Uncle Jim even more.
But then the thing of with taking a bath with grandma, and I forgot about the little bit of water. You're right about that.
Mhm.
But she used that potato line on me every single. She must have given me 100 baths, and every time she'd be like, "Man, you got enough dirt on that knee to grow a potato." And I'd look down there at that knee, and I'd see a little bit of dirt, and I'd be like, "Wow, that's amazing that you can grow a potato with that much dirt." And then finally, I began to realize that this was just grandma saying things,
Being facetious.
but she liked to use the same lines over and over again, regardless of what they were. So
Right. Well, Grandma always sat me. We had a round table in the kitchen and it was kind of butted up against the wall. And Grandma always sat me at the back of the table, right up against the wall, because I eat so slow and I still, as an adult, eat so slow that all the other men and like farm workers and stuff, if I was in the way, they'd have to get around me. But if I was sat right next to the wall, they could all get out and leave and I'd still be sitting there chewing while Grandma was doing the dishes. And so it was just so funny how, like, I was such a slow eater then, and I'm still a slow eater, so things don't change, I guess.
I was not a slow eater then. I was a pretty rapid eater, and she would always get on me about that all the time. Like, slow down. This was another one of her sayings. We're not going to a fire. And so she would say that fire line every time I was eating. She was always telling me to slow down. Now, what's interesting, Cheryl, after all these years, I am like the slowest person at the table almost every time. I mean,
Hey, Grandma, be so proud of you.
people all around me get done with their food, and I'm still eating, and we've all eaten the same amount of food. And it's like finally grandma's influence has sunk in. So
Yes.
anyway, well, hey, I do have maybe a few other things I could share, but they've kind of slipped my mind here. We're about 18 minutes into this, but we are going to enjoy a few more hours here in Pattaya City, and then we're going to drive back up to Bangkok. I think we're going to do one or two things on the way up, and then we get on a flight tonight out of Bangkok and fly about an hour and a half down to Phuket, and which is very much a resort area, and we'll be down there for 4 nights. So we'll have a lot of good things to share as we go along there. And tomorrow night we do have. Is this segment 7? Segment 7.
I think so, and I do have a subject picked out on this one.
Cheryl's boyfriend's countdown calendar. So that'll be pretty exciting for everyone. I know.
Yeah, we're still in
my
8th
friend
grade, so I'm
Okay.
going to go with Jeff Ziegler tomorrow night.
Oh, awesome. I remember.
Yeah.
I remember some of that. I remember his. What did he have first? A Camaro, and then he went up to the black Trans Am.
Yeah. Well, we
No.
had a little romance it was kind of a summer loving kind of thing like Grease, but
Right.
anyway, I had a little
All right.
romance with Jeff Ziegler, so we'll discuss that tomorrow night.
All right. Sounds good. Well, hey, you have a good night there. Get some rest, and we will catch up with you tomorrow.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.